Hello friends, welcome to the MARE Podcast. Before we get started, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Don't forget that you can find more about the MARE project at www.marehamburg.com, and you can support the project and this podcast through Patreon. All the links are in the description. Enjoy!
Hello friends, welcome to another episode of the MARE Podcast. I have the pleasure of having Jordy tonight with me. Hello Jordy, welcome to the podcast.
Hello George, nice to be here.
Oh, it's nice to have you, love to have you. Jordy was invited to the podcast. I don't know Jordy personally, we never met, but I have seen your presentation in the MARE lectures, which I found very interesting. So I was like, let's get this guy on a podcast to talk us about archaeology. So we're not going to talk about your research now. We'll talk about it later. Do you want to give us kind of a rundown of how you came to find out about MARE? Did they invite you in, or did you contact people from MARE? Do you know anyone from MARE?
I think actually that the first time I heard about MARE was when I met Maurice, one of your team members, on a conference in Malta, like 2 or 3 years ago. We met at Under the Mediterranean, organized by the University of Malta back then, and he told us all about his new project, what they were planning to do, and he got us to actually sign up for the newsletter, which then spiraled into the invitations for all of the lectures. And yeah, I've actually followed the program from pretty much the beginning.
Very nice. Oh, it's very nice to hear. So you've known the MARE project more than me. If you have been following the newsletter since 3 years ago, I think that MARE, the conference was 5 years ago. The online lecture started 4 years ago. So it's not that long, but it's long enough. And I think the newsletter is a pretty successful endeavor. People accept it and embrace it. Kind of. I think that's the notion that I'm getting from people. But anyway, enough about MARE. Let's talk about you for a bit. Do you want to give us a bit of a rundown or run through of your life, academic life, preferably? But if you want to tell us where you're from first, and then give us a rundown about your studies, where you are right now, and what you did in the past.
I'm actually from Belgium. That's where I started my studies in normal archaeology. I think, like most of the people in this niche part of academia, where I completed a bachelor and a master in normal archaeology. And it was actually during one of my first introductory classes to archaeology from an old professor, Professor Lodewijks, who gave us an overview of everything that's archaeology, of everything that's possible. It was in one of the very first weeks that I started my studies. And in his first presentation, his first PowerPoint, there were like 1 or 2 slides that mentioned maritime archaeology. He quickly skipped over them. He just mentioned it. And at the end of the class, I went to him. I asked him, where can I find more information about this? Because the professor himself back then wasn't really an expert on it himself. So he just gave me some of the general mentions about universities that are teaching it, about journals that I can consult. And from there on, I actually developed a big interest in the whole field. I started taking diving classes in Belgium. And then after my studies, I started looking for the next step, how I could roll into the whole field. And I found the master's in Marseille, Aix-Marseille University in France. So I applied, I got accepted, and after doing the master's, the M.A.R.E, Master of Maritime Archaeology, for 2 years, I was able to continue where I am now, and now I'm currently working on my PhD at the same university.
Very nice. It's another story of how the undergrad lectures influence people who go into academia and live off it. And it's super nice to hear that you got interested in week 1. It was a love at first sight kind of thing. You just listen to it okay, here we go. So from Belgium to Aix in Marseille in France, and then you stayed next So what
Exactly.
you are in your PhD now? What year of your PhD? Are you towards the end?
No, I'm still in my second year of the PhD, so I consider myself still in the early stages.
As you should, as you should, as you should. Is it a 4-year program, right?
Here it starts out as a 3-year program, and then
Mm.
you can ask for extra years each year. So,
Okay, okay, very nice. So what made you choose MARE? Because I think you're not the first of. I think Judith, of course, in episode 2 did MARE, and then Olga in episode, I want to say 5, did the MARE masters in X, and then now you are the third one. So why MARE? What made you choose? I think it's a very practical kind of uh, uh, program in archaeology, right?
yes, yeah, indeed. Well, I actually applied and got accepted to 2 programs. I applied also for the one in Southampton. And when I got the exception letter from Southampton, I didn't know yet if I was going to be accepted in MARE. And that's when I had to make a choice. Do I accept the application for Southampton and continue there, or do I wait for my evaluation about MARE? And well, it has had, there were 2 main reasons that I actually chose to let Southampton at that point in time go and try for MARE. That's, first of all, there was a pretty big tuition fee to actually start the studies in Southampton. And in general, I think it was more practical for me to follow and go for the courses in France. Um, for, first of all, the language, but also because it's 2 years, so you have more time to both spend on your individual courses and on your dissertation. So there were multiple reasons, but yeah.
Well, yeah, you talk about it with such an ease, but it sounds like a horrific decision you have to make. You're like, you say, I have this secured position in Southampton, and I think they reply back to you in like spring, right?
Yes,
Something like
yes,
that. And
yes,
then X replies back to you during the summer,
exactly.
right? If I remember correctly. So it's kind of a decision that I have this position in, I could go to Southampton and do it, but I choose to not take them up on their offer and hope and pray that they will accept me in X. That you say it in kind of a light fashion, like, oh yeah, I didn't do it, I did the other thing. But it sounds like a horrific place to be, because if you say no to Southampton and then X says no, what do? You're left like, oh yeah, well, I made the wrong decision. Very interesting. And also you pointed out something very important, which are fees in the UK, which I think have got like, oh no, it's not an opinion, it's a fact that they've gone through the roof.
Yes,
And
yes.
I don't know. It seems like nowadays, if you want to study in the UK, you either have a scholarship, or a couple of them in some cases, so you
Mhm.
can be able to do it, or the Europeans are basically cut it out from some of, in my opinion, the world's most renowned institutions. I don't know how you see it. Do you think it's some people think this is a bad thing, but some people also think that no, this is a very good thing because Europe will develop eventually. I don't know. What's your views on this?
Well, I actually was a bit sad about it because, like you said in the beginning, when we were talking with my old professors in Belgium, they were still from the old tradition. What they knew about maritime archaeology was Oxford and Southampton. Those were the main institutions. If you wanted to make a career in maritime archaeology, you had to go to either one of them to get that name under your on your CV and develop from there. So it was, like you said, indeed a big risk at the time to say no to Southampton, and it was uh, well, I'm now glad that I went to Aix-Marseille University, but when I applied, I think mentally Southampton would have been my first choice. Of course, while I was applying, I already knew about the tuition fees, and it was already playing in the back of my head. So it was a difficult decision indeed, but I'm glad with the choice that I made now. So There are no regrets.
All right, excellent. That's what you want to hear. That there's no regrets, that you moved on. So now you're in the second year of your DPhil, and do you want to talk to us a bit about what you're doing in your DPhil?
Yeah, of course. So what I'm actually trying to work on is, in general, the preservation of underwater sites. I know that this is a subject that has come up a lot in the past decades. A lot of institutions are trying to collaborate on it, having local or more regional projects. And what I am trying to do now is combine the methodologies, review the methodologies that all of these different projects over the past decade have applied regionally, locally, and find some kind of best practice. It sounds very kind of vague maybe and kind of ambitious, especially ambitious, but I think there is something we can do here, especially because we're combining a desk-based stage and a fieldwork stage that should be, as we are trying to think it out, should be applicable universally. So we can try to develop some tool sets that are available and open source for everyone, and in that way give some guidance to maybe local agencies or something like that. I don't know.
Oh, very nice. No, very nice. Of course. So let's start from the beginning.
Yes.
Underwater heritage. What does that entail? Is underwater heritage shipwrecks and harbors? How do we define this? What is our underwater heritage?
It's not only underwater heritage. It's not only shipwrecks or harbors. There are a lot of different definitions for it, but what I mostly see it as is some archaeology or, mostly archaeological sites that have been submerged, that either, like you say, harbor remains are supposed to be underwater, or like shipwrecks or other infrastructure that was terrestrial but due to sea level changes has submerged over time. And that is actually worth investigating from an archaeological and scientific point of view, and is, as thus, also worth preserving.
Very nice. I think it's super clear. So what kind of depths are we talking about? Do we preserve sites for people to see, or do we preserve sites for the sake of preserving sites? Because if we do that, I imagine if there's a ship at 120 meters depth, we don't care about it. Or do we?
Well, that's one of the main questions, isn't it? There are sites that we open to the bigger public, and this also again depends on local legislations. Like there are some Mediterranean countries that try to keep most of their archaeological sites secret to prevent big influxes of tourists, of visitors, and others that are opening it more to everybody as a common good. Now, like you said, depending on the depth, not all sites are, well, visitable, like accessible for everyone. But even the deep ones can be interesting scientifically. And that's something that we have to keep in mind when we are prioritizing sites. Because, like you said, there are so many sites, deep ones, shallow ones, and we cannot preserve everything. So that's when I think the local governments, the local agencies need to take responsibility to prioritize and select sites based on what should be preserved from a scientific point of view, but also what is important to the local narrative. And this is a dangerous word to use, narrative, because it can be exploited or used as a certain institution or a certain group wants. But I think there is something to heritage sites that can help us understand the past and show the importance of what we're doing here.
Oh yeah, of course. And I mean, the moment you said the word narrative, I was like, politics. Like, oh yeah, we can
Yes.
preserve that side because it proves something for us. But if it's just, I imagine it's not just the narrative, right? It's also about the technicality of preserving a site. So my next kind of like question is, how do we preserve a site? What does preserving a site mean?
Mm.
Because as I think Rebecca told us 2 episodes ago from the University of Malta, she told us you can put a fence around a shipwreck. So what do we do? How do we preserve them?
Well, that's actually a second very important question that I'm trying to investigate in my thesis. Um, how to preserve a site depends mostly on what's going on that site, and that forms the core for my research. What I'm trying to do now is seeing what's happening to certain sites on a local site scale, but also on regional scale. That way, if we establish that, for example, a certain site is heavily eroding because of local currents or tidal movement, um, we can establish that certain sites are more threatened than others. And sometimes, because of the scale, the sheer scale of this site, if we're talking, for example, about a World War II carrier or that's lying on the seabed 120 meters long, we cannot, like you said, put a fence around that. That's not going to be practical at all. So what can we do to preserve it? Sometimes the answer is just document it. Sometimes there is no way to physically preserve a site. So the only thing we can do is document it, take samples, and try to answer as many scientific questions as we can within the boundaries of what's practical.
Oh yeah. So I didn't ask before, but I should have asked, I think, at the beginning. But what part of the world are you working in?
I am working on the Mediterranean.
Mediterranean.
So,
Okay.
yes, Mediterranean. And I am actually trying to compare a little bit the environmental conditions in the Mediterranean with those in other regions, like, for example, North Sea or the Atlantic coast, and see which processes are more dominant in certain environments and are thus um, more important to evaluate in those regions.
Okay. So what's the situation in the Mediterranean? I know it's a pretty salty sea. Is there anything else? Are there strong currents in the Mediterranean? No.
Well, compared to, for example, the North Sea or the Atlantic coast, the currents here are less dominant. In the Mediterranean, we have also a very steep drop off to to greater depths, which means that at great depths, those surface currents, those surface tides will not create any movement of sediments on the seabed. Now, on a coastal region where we're talking about depths until maybe 50 meters, storms or in general wave movement can still generate vortices, generate water movement on wreck sites or on other sites, on general archaeological sites, which can move or decontextualize singular objects, which can destabilize bigger parts of a wreck or of a harbor structure. And in those shallower depths, water movement from currents could be more dominant. Now, we're also talking about other aspects in the Mediterranean, for example. Because it's a very warm sea, we have a bigger population of, for example, shipworms that are very threatening for any organic material. Now we're talking about wooden shipwrecks or other organics. And that's a problem that they don't have in more northern regions like the Baltic Sea, the North Sea. So that's where you see the equilibrium shifting from one aspect to the other, and that's how you can see which categories also of sites should be watched closer, you see?
Oh yeah, and I was about to say when halfway through what you said, I was about to say, oh, that explains then why we find so many shipwrecks in the Mediterranean. Is that the tides are not as dominant? But then you completed and said, yes, but there are other problems in the Mediterranean, as for example the temperature of the sea. And you mentioned the shipworm. Do you want to talk to us about what shipworm is? And I thought, no, I didn't. I have no idea actually. Is it something that happens everywhere, no matter the depth? It's only like if there's a wooden ship, there's shipworm in it.
Well, shipworms actually require a certain amount of for are an underwater species, and they require certain levels of salt in your water, certain temperature, but also a certain level of oxygen. And this is something that's very important, and that's also why at very, very large depths, like for example in the Black Sea, there are no shipworms on those shipwrecks, because at very, very great depths, there is almost no oxygen to accommodate these shipworms. Now, what are shipworms exactly? They are some kind of parasites, just larvae that are always there in seawater. Now, when they get to some organic material, like for example a wooden hull, a plank, something from a wreck, or even from boats that are still afloat, they're still going around, they will attach themselves to the surface. They will make a little hole. They are in their infant state only a few millimeters large, and they will start burying a hole into the plank and basically disintegrating the plank from within. And this will very quickly, if not treated right away, disintegrate and eat away a whole shipwreck.
Wow, that's that's amazing. It's amazing for amazing to imagine. Terrible
Yes.
if you're the ship or the archaeologist looking for the shipwreck. So you mentioned before that we can't save everything. We can't preserve everything. Sometimes it's just impossible, because
Yes.
I imagine that preserving a ship or any part of underwater heritage can be costly, time consuming, needing a whole bunch of experts taking care of it. And then it's not just a one-time thing that you preserve and you're done. You leave. You need to constantly monitor and preserve the area. So just to get kind of in the starting point of that, you said that we can't preserve everything, but we can have models of everything. We can digitally preserve them and get as much information from them as we can. So I wanted to talk a bit about this modeling that we do, this 3D modeling that we do of ships, and especially underwater sunk ships and harbors. Do you want to explain to us, how do we, or do you? No, I haven't done it, so I'm not going to take credit for that. So how do you create a model of a ship?
Well, there are multiple ways to do it. Now, one of the most popular ways nowadays is to try and document the whole site as far as possible in 3D. How do we do this? There are, again, multiple ways. For example, there is the very known photogrammetry, which will, if you take enough pictures of a certain object, a certain site from many angles, you can reconstruct and paste all the photos together in software and reconstruct your site or your object in 3D. This is very time consuming, but it gives you one of the best results because you're working with highly detailed photographs, which are, if pasted together, will give you an exact model of your site. Now, there are other options as well. For example, in geophysics, we have the application of sonars, and there are different stages of sonars that we can talk about. You have the general side scan sonar, which will give you just a flat image of your site, but there are also the more advanced multi-beam echo sounders. Now, to explain it very, very generally, these work the same as another sonar. They will send out a sound wave to the seabed and will bounce back on anything solid, giving you, by measuring the time that it took to go there and bounce back, the distance to your solid object or the seabed. Now, these multi-beams, they do this a few thousand times per second, which means that for each of those readings, you get a data point, which, if all put together, all thousands of them, will give you the 3D representation of whatever you just basically scanned on the seabed. Now, this will give you less resolution, but it's a very efficient way to scan large areas, larger sites, just by going over them with a survey vessel.
Well, that sounds really easy, but how much would that cost? Because you said there's field work involved in your research, right? So I think a topic we don't talk about enough, I think. And when we talk about underwater sites or archaeological sites in general, people would say that, oh, archaeologists have not done their work. They left them there. The finds are left there scattered. We don't know what to do with it. They're not doing their job. And we don't usually talk enough of how money-driven, really, archaeology is and how much money it requires, for example, to do a 3D model of a World War II carrier, 120-meter length in the Mediterranean. So you must know better than me, but what's the cost involved in like finding a ship and making a 3D model of it?
Well, I will be very honest with you. I have no idea, because you can maybe call it luck, or you can call it another approach to this problem of finding your budget, your resources for your research. But what I did was I contacted, for example, in Belgium, the Hydrographic Service. I explained them what I was working on. I explained them what I wanted to do, and they were hooked on it. They told me that every day they are going out with their survey vessel, which has one of the state-of-the-art best multi-beams attached to it, and they will survey all of these shipwrecks in the North Sea, but just from a safety point of view. They will just go over it so that afterwards they can create nautical charts. Other ships that are passing by in the area will know where the shipwrecks are located exactly. And while they are going over these pieces of history, pieces of cultural heritage on a daily basis, they don't really know what they're working with. So when I explained them the idea and what I was trying to work on, they were immediately open to take us along and have us have this whole survey, and we could basically choose the sites that we wanted. So if you find the right partners, and sometimes this means thinking out of the box, don't limit yourself to archaeology or to the sector of heritage. Think outside of the box and find the right partners that could be interested in what you're doing. That will already solve a lot of problems when it comes to resources and budget.
Wow, that's the most amazing thing. I can imagine how you would feel if something like an email comes back and it's like, oh yeah, come along, jump in. We're going to like a multi-beam sonar, the wrecks. Wow, that sounds fabulous. That sounds fabulous. And as you were speaking, I thought of, I don't know if you're aware of the project. It's something that has happened in Cyprus for the ship called Agios Spiridon. And I think this is online, that the ship was kind of a historic monument, but it was about to be destroyed. And they did a photo mosaic of the whole ship inside and out and uploaded in the web. So the ship can be preserved, even though the ship is not physically anywhere anymore. It's lost. So this got me thinking. And then you mentioned about the hydrographic service of Belgium. So is there a place where we can go and like see those wrecks? Is this just points on a map, or are there places that we can actually see 3D scans of ships?
Well, actually, for the hydrographic service in Belgium, there is a website with a whole database of all of their shipwrecks. And the ones that have already been surveyed, for those, the 3D models are just online for everybody to see. So that is what I was talking about earlier. There are two different approaches to disclosing sites. One of them is where countries are trying to keep it a little bit hidden so there's no exposure to the public. But for example, here, the hydrographic service, they are just opening up their database and everybody can go consult the location, the history behind the wrecks, because each of these wrecks also has a little fiche with old photographs, old plans, the history of how they serviced, when they sank, what happened, and all the models, the 3D models that were made thanks to the multi-beam.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I can imagine how helpful it will be for your research to see kind of the older versions of the map and see how the wreck progressed throughout the years.
Yes.
So how you could have done anything in maritime archaeology, right? So how did you land it here doing this instead of, I don't know, pottery, for example, stuff like that? How did you end up doing, what led you here doing this, like pursuing this specific research?
Yeah, I know that it's very unconventional. And I've been told this many times that as an archaeologist, you should maybe stick to your guns, stick to what you know, take your pottery or take your remains, your skeletal remains, and try to reconstruct what happened. But yeah, I shows a different path here. And I think it's not a bad thing to do, because we are always talking about how we should be interdisciplinary, how we should work with other scientific disciplines. And when you have people who are working in those liminal spaces, who are trying to get the best of both worlds, it's true that we will never be an expert in the geophysics that are all behind these techniques. But working in those liminal spaces will allow you to understand what you're working with, and at the same time, where you want to go. Because if you're working with a technician from a hydrographic service, they will know how to document the wreck as they will need it, but they don't know what you're looking for as an archaeologist or as a heritage manager, as a preservation consultant. So that's why we need people in those in-between spaces. Now, how I got there, when I was still working in Belgium, we have some kind of institute for marine sciences in Belgium, and there is one maritime archaeologist there, basically the only one that's responsible for all of the maritime archaeology in the maritime zones for Belgium. And I stayed in contact with him during my studies because I wanted to get into this field. And one day I went to an open day where they presented all of the techniques that they were doing, not only for archaeology, there were also the biologists, the geophysicists, everybody. And that's when I first saw this application about multi-beams and geophysics surveys and how they can use them to basically scan in a very efficient way the seabed. And boys being boys, you like shiny new toys, and when you see something that looks very cool and very technological, yes, it sparked something. And I was always interested in trying to combine them with the passion for archaeology.
Oh my God, yes. As in our shining toys, and especially I think when you're a diver, you kind of become kind of a gadget maniac, and you're like, oh yeah, gadgets, amazing, underwater gadgets. Oh my God. So how is diving in Belgium? Do you like it?
I like it. However, the thing is, when I arrived here, especially in M.A.R.E, because you're working each year with a very international team. When you get to a master like this, you come together with other students from all different countries, and honestly, most of them come from warmer countries, where you're diving in a blue sea with 50 meters of visibility, while the water is 24, 25 degrees. In Belgium, it's not like that. Usually your visibility is 1 meter on a good day, 10 centimeters on a bad day, and temperatures in winter can go down to 4 or 5 degrees. So I didn't know any better because I learned to dive in Belgium. And I actually still like it. Because here, yes, it's very nice to dive, but there's also kind of a challenge to it when you're diving in worse conditions that makes it a little bit more adventurous, I guess. So that's something that also appeals to it, I think.
Oh yeah, I get it. I've spent all my life diving in warm waters, and then I came to the UK, and I discovered the joys of dry sea diving in 4 degrees water.
Yes.
There is some kind of adventure to it. I agree. There is like, you feel a kind of the adrenaline rushing through your body. You're like, oh, let's go into that freezing cold water. It's amazing. I love it. And you like become kind of delusional at the end. So, yeah. So anyway, how I want to talk a bit more about MARE, because we mention it a lot throughout this podcast. So, and would you suggest someone will go to MARE nowadays? How would their program look like? What do you do during that masters?
Okay. So a program for MARE is 2 years, and they basically split it up in 4 different semesters, where during the first semester, being September until December, you are following courses. They are giving you introductions to maritime trade, to excavation methodologies, survey methodologies in maritime archaeology, harbor archaeology, all of this. And during the second semester, it's mostly designated for working on your master dissertation and practical field schools. So during those 4 semesters, you are getting the best of, say, theoretical courses and practical experience. And I think something that you have to think about very early on is what you actually want to do with your dissertation and what you're interested in. Because the very first semester from the first year, you get all these introductions into different courses. So you can basically pick and choose, see what's there, see what's interesting. But then when January comes around, you have to start working on your master dissertation. And they always say, and it's true, that you're not fixed to continue the second year on what you were working on in the first year, but it's important to know what you're good at and what you like. And this is something that's very stressful for students. It was for me, it was for all of my classmates, and I know that it's as stressful for all of the new students. So I don't really have any advice to give there. Maybe if you already, like me, I was very lucky that I already had some experience with all of these technologies, and I kept an open mind. My first semester, I was exploring other things as well. There was a point that I asked some of the professors if there were opportunities to work on ceramics for my dissertation. I stayed with what I know that I'm good at and what I already liked, but there are certainly some opportunities and experts to talk to if you want to explore different options.
Oh yeah. So your master's thesis was similar to your PhD thesis.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
similar
So
topic.
the regs that I talked about for in Belgium, those were the ones that I worked on for my master dissertation.
All right. Okay, makes sense. So you did a 2 years master's program. You got a taste of academia. You got a taste of how it is to write the research, original research, and yet here you are doing a PhD. And I need to ask, why? Why are you doing a PhD?
Honestly, I like research, doing research for what it is. I will say that I'm not an idealist. I will not be someone who spends the next 40 years of his life getting deeper and deeper into one subject, being the absolute world specialist on this one, like for example, this one pottery shirt that was found on one side. No, I will not be one of those. There are other people who are interested in that. I will not be that. Now, why am I doing this PhD? Because I wanted to really get a chance to make a contribution to the science as it is. That's why I'm working on something that seems maybe a bit practical and less philosophical, less philological in some kind of way. But I think this is my chance to get to know the topics that I think are useful to, well, practical for the science and the practices in maritime archaeology. And I don't know where to go from there afterwards, but we'll see.
Interesting. So if I ask you now, where do you see yourself in 10 years? You can give me an answer.
Well, I always imagined myself afterwards in some kind of heritage management, heritage preservation kind of function. Maybe for a research institution, maybe for a government agency. We'll never know. We will know, but I don't know right now. That's what I would see myself do, what I think I would be good at, and what I don't mind trying out.
Okay, interesting. Do you think you're spending too much of your life doing this?
I don't think so. I have tried. Well, I did my my studies in Belgium, and after that, I worked 1 year in the field for terrestrial archaeology. And I will say that during those months digging through the Flemish mud in winter, I had some doubts if I should stay in archaeology. But then I made the right choice to come to the Mediterranean country and enjoying the warm waters of Marseille. So it's a change, and I like it for now. If I will stay in archaeology, I think so. I already invested a lot of my time, a lot of efforts in it. A lot of people have invested in me, and you as well. Like we are.
Yeah. I'm talking like I'm some kind of like out of it, but yeah.
But we are. I think I will make as much out of it as I can, and we'll see in which function that will manifest it in the future.
Very interesting. So do you want to go back to Belgium, or you don't mind where you find your work?
I don't mind, I think, where I find my work. Right now, I'm not even sure if I will stay in France or if there are other opportunities on the horizon. But when I think about settling down somewhere, I'm not sure if I go back to Belgium. I'm sure that my parents and my friends would love for me to go back. And it's certainly an option. But right now, I'm not sure what next year will bring. That's why I'm now already looking around for opportunities afterwards. I'm only in my second year for the PhD, but you always have to keep your eyes on opportunities. And I'm trying to keep a network going. I try to stay in touch with other researchers in the Mediterranean, in all kind of countries, but at the same time, I also stay in touch with the people in Belgium, because in Belgium, it's a very, very young field. Like I said, we have one practicing archaeologist, maritime archaeologist in Belgium. We have one professor who gives a class at university in maritime archaeology, and we have some interested parties in other functions in government agencies, but it's still a very young field. And I don't know, maybe in the future there could be a bigger development of the whole field, maritime archaeology in Belgium, and maybe me and my colleagues could be part of it. Well, but it's a very optimistic view. So
Oh yeah, but it's the sign. Sadly, it's a sign of the times. How young researchers and early career researchers, when you ask them about, so what does the future hold, they would all say, well, nobody knows.
Yes,
We'll see. And I mean, if you feeling young and adventurous, you'd be like, oh yes, I love that. I love the uncertainty. I don't know where the road will take me. But I feel like as you get older and older, you're like, okay, maybe I do like some certainty in my life, and I don't want my whole life to be an adventure. But you mentioned your parents and your friends, and I wanted to know, were they supportive to you pursuing archaeology, or did they say like, "What are you doing with your life? Go become a lawyer or something and make some money"?
No, they were actually very supportive about it, because there is always this one anecdote that I tell when I was in high school. My Latin teacher at parents teacher parents day, they called my parents over and she told them to not let me pursue a career in archaeology, that it would be a complete waste of my future, and that I should spend my talents elsewhere, having an actual career. And that's the point that my mom got very upset with the teacher. She told her that I can make my own choices, and if I want to pursue archaeology, that they will support me 100%. And that was a very good feeling, to be there in the room, to know that your parents will support you. And I think that they are proud of me, of what I'm doing, what I'm accomplishing, while I am very aware that this is a very different life from what they had. Because I am now at the age that they were already married, built a house, and they had me. So I have none of that. So there is a very big difference between the generations. But I think it's part of the choices we make. We are pursuing something else, pursuing something that we love and that we think will make a difference, that we hope will make a difference. And I think that's worth something.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure they're proud of you and what you've done so far. And you're right. Times have changed, people have changed, and now late 20s is not too late for everything
Mhm.
or anything. Or that's what we tell ourselves, right? So we can feel
True.
better about ourselves. But we spoke around the subject, but we didn't get to it. So what made you choose archaeology? Was it just that you like the field, or is it like something else, or something happened? You're like, oh, archaeology, yes, this is what I want to do.
Well, maybe you've heard it before and you will hear it afterwards, but pop culture, like the movies of Indiana Jones, games like the Uncharted series, had a huge influence on me as a kid, as a young adult. And when I actually had to make that choice to choose a field of study at university, I was still on the edge, because I was very interested in something with culture. I studied Latin, I studied ancient Greek in high school, just because of all the history that's behind it, also all the nuances that it will bring to your education. But at the same time, and this is also very, well, very honest, my high school was kind of, how should I say, pushing their students to pursue careers in more prestigious fields like law or medical degrees, things like that. And at the last year of high school, I was very much on the edge of actually conforming to the peer pressure, going in one of those directions. But after one of the last days of high school, I came home, I told my parents, listen, I always wanted to do archaeology. It seems to me what I want to do. That's what I'm gonna start, and they completely supported me with it. So I followed the first courses, the first weeks in university, and I was hooked on it. Both because it brings you the intellectual satisfaction of studying these ancient civilizations, connecting your clues, whatever you find on the field, with a narrative. There's the word again, with the something, the events that could have led to this composition of remains. But at the same time, I loved it because it gave you such a variety of perspectives. You don't only sit in a library reading books and synthesizing knowledge, you're also on the field. You get opportunities to travel around. You get to see all of these different sites and places in the world, and you meet a lot of people who are working on different subjects while they are coming from the same background, and that is something I think is very interesting.
So was your archaeology degree as you would expected it to be? Or did you expect something else, but you were like satisfied with the result at the end? Or did you expect the way it turned out?
Well, I liked the way it turned out. It was very different. For example, when I compare my studies in Belgium with the 2 years I did here in France, it was very different. They have a different approach, but that might also stem from the fact that most of the time that I spend in Belgium in archaeology stems from being a bachelor student where there is 30, 50, 60 students in a classroom to being in a master where there's, for us, 8 people, and you get a lot of treatment, a lot of attention where you can actually interact with your professor. So there was for me already a big difference there. Now, I personally like the fact that I already had some field experience, that I worked on the field in Belgium, and that I now see the differences, because I can see what the difference is in how they work, how they approach certain subjects, and I can compare for myself how I would choose to approach those things, like fieldwork or research or academia, like you say.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I have, out of curiosity, I have to ask. I don't have the data to support this, but I have kind of like wild kind of rumors going around and hearing from people. But in your undergrad, right, the amount of people that started first year with you was the same as the number of people who finished it? Or did you realize, or did you notice significant amount of dropouts throughout the years?
We saw the biggest dropout in Christmas of the first year of undergrad.
Also, one semester in.
Yes, one semester in, the first exams passed, and half of the people dropped out. Half, yes.
And how many was full?
We started with a pretty small class. We started with 25 in the first year, and by January there was 14 of us. At the end of the bachelor, there were 6 of us continuing, well, from my year, continuing to the master. Then in the master, I think we were 3 or 4 from my year, from the same people that started with me, that actually graduated in the same year, so did the full course.
Wow. Yeah. So this is the pattern that I'm noticing, that a lot of people are expecting something else from archaeology. Maybe that's what, because I don't know how it is in Belgium, but I went to school in Cyprus, for example. So in school, there was a class on history that sometimes included archaeology in the kind of first years, I guess. But then it turned into history. So people will go into the university expecting it to be a history lesson. And then they will like squabble up with all those material, like engagement and theories, and like the having materials in their hand and having to explain typology and having to explain a whole bunch of things that they did not expect to have to explain. So this is kind of my question is like, why do you see this is happening? Because this is something that happens, I think, worldwide. As I'm talking to people, I see, everyone's like, oh yes, we started on undergrad, we were 30 people. By year 2, there was 10 of us. And everyone was like, gone. Why do you think this is happening?
Maybe because they still romanticize archaeology. I also did it, but when they get confronted with the reality of the fact that you're not going to walk into a tomb and find a golden statue, but that the actual reality will be plowing a football field, finding 3 traces of wooden poles that were inserted there and having to work with that, that's something that sobers up a lot of students. And well, that's the reality of archaeology in most Western European countries. And I think that's something that, well, frightens off the people who are not really into it for the right, I don't know, the right reasons, who are still maybe like romanticizing it and just having that vision of it.
No, yeah. Do you think that archaeology should be something that is taught in school, or do you think it's something that should stay in university level education?
I think it should stay in university level because it's a craft. It's very specific. However, I think that in high school, for example, on those career days, there should be put more attention on including archaeologists there. Because after high school, I gave them my contact information. I told them if there's ever a student who is interested in following a career in archaeology, give me a call. I will come by and talk about it. But I don't know if it's because there is no interest from the students, or if they just don't know about it, or if there's no communication. But there seems to be no communication to the younger generations in high school.
In the field of archaeology. Yeah, you mentioned how you were watching Indiana Jones and like playing the Uncharted games, and I mean, I assume you never walked into a tomb and found a golden statue. I assume. I don't know what you're up to. So it's very interesting to see how this is kind of the first impression that people are getting about what archaeology is. I mean, people who are not familiar with archaeology. Whilst, for example, in other professions, they may get a more realistic kind of approach to what that profession is. For example, I don't know, you can watch Grey's Anatomy and be like, oh yeah, this is how doctors are. Or you can watch Suits and be like, I don't want to work 28 hours per day. Because
I don't think Suits is a very realistic representation of a law firm, but
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't know. But when I saw Suits, I was like, maybe I should. Maybe I should. Would I be a millionaire if I do it? If I go into corporate law? But
I don't think we will be a millionaire. I don't think we will be a millionaire with archaeology. So that's already something you can rule out. But yeah, you're actually right. There are a lot of professions where the younger generations, they get a lot from television. They get a lot from newer media that we're seeing now with social media. And archaeology seems to be left out. And honestly, I think it's not a bad idea, because those media will, like I said, romanticize and maybe pull out of context the field of study as it is. There is, I think, still a lot of work to do from, as we say, working in communicating to schools, but there's already a good approach going on in, for example, museums, where they're not only now displaying the finds and the history behind it, but there are also a lot of museums that now include a temporary or a fixed exhibition about how the digs were found, how the archaeological practice goes on. And that's something already, if you are interested in it, you could visit that at a younger age.
Oh yeah, but of course that requires people going to a museum and actually spending time there, which is another whole kind of chapter of like people going to museums without being forced to by a school or by like some kind of organization. So maybe there's a message there to new parents, like take your kids to museums, take your kids, like expose them to culture and antiquities and archaeology and history and all theater and music and all that, because it's very, very important. But it's just, there is this, I think there's something missing, right, in the world where archaeology lives in that weird kind of like edge between being completely known and completely unknown at the same time. Where if you see at the one side of the fence, you see Indiana Jones and Lara Croft, and you see documentaries, docuseries, stuff like that. And you see that part of archaeology, the exciting stuff. But of course, you won't turn on Netflix and see someone studying for 8 hours straight. No one will see that. And then there's the other side of archaeology, and where there's like you and me and people who are like in an office, and of course sometimes we go out in the field and we do a dive and we find stuff and we study that stuff. But most of the times we are behind a computer screen, which for us is super exciting, right? I read about a new article and I'll go to my friends, I'm like, oh my god, I've read this thing, it's amazing, you should take a look at it, or something like that. So the most difficult question of the day will be, because you've talked about and I noted down because I liked it, the in-between spaces in archaeology, the people in the in-between spaces. So we have the people who are connecting archaeology with other disciplines. So how do we bridge the gap between archaeology and the community, or the disciplines of culture, like movies and music and, I don't know, podcast, hey, or something like that?
Well, that's honestly a very difficult question, and one that I don't have an answer to right now. It's the typical answer would be create more engagement, get out there, create workshops for schools and try to teach them what actual archaeology is. But it requires engagement and effort from both sides. And I am not sure how we can get to that point where we are both, let's say it, interesting for the general people, but at the same time true to our what we're actually doing, true to the practice.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know it's a difficult question. You're not here to go through easy questions, but I will. I mean, obviously, I don't have an answer to it myself. Like, I can think of, like, there are some kind of things happening, like having production companies specializing in archaeology or something like that, or like specific programs and, I don't know, parts, or like someone doing their parts. So I will make this easier for you. How would you communicate your research to the people? How would you make your research more accessible?
Well, I have the very easy job of working, well, the very easy aspect of working with very cool models and very cool images of these almost ghost-like 3D representations of larger archaeological sites. And like it was for me, I know that people just love to see these images and imagine what is actually there under the water. So that is some way that my line of work, my research, is going to be very easily attractive to a larger public, especially because it's just very impressive to see all of this in such in such a transitive way, you know.
Oh yeah, you can get closer as possible to it without getting wet, without getting into the water.
Exactly.
And I mean, I can totally see someone just taking your 3D models or your pictures and being like, and this is the story of how the HMS whatever sank, and they sprang out a whole movie, a whole documentary about it, and then at the end it's just what remains, the 3D model, the picture of it. So
you know that
yeah.
you know that there's actually the University of Southampton. They have this very cool project where they made all of these 3D models with photogrammetry. They printed the top-down view on a postcard and they handed them out. And if you actually just scan the postcard with your phone, it will go to a website, give you an AR view of the postcard on your table, on your desk, and you will just see the 3D model appearing from the postcard. So that's something that's very impressive, that could work in these kinds of instances, and it's very easy to distribute that. You just hand somebody a postcard, tell them to look it over with their phone, and suddenly they have the site, the shipwreck, the harbor structure in their living room on their table, which is impressive.
Wow. And you could very easily add an audio there, someone explaining what this is and what's going on. That sounds wonderful. I didn't know about that. I knew at the University of Southampton doing 3D model. There's a project about 3D modeling of ships, something in the Black Sea.
Yes.
I remember something like that. Yeah, but I didn't know about the postcards. So I will take a note of that. Jordy, this has been amazing. Thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. It has been super informative, and I loved it. Do you have any closing remarks for us before we go?
Well, depending on who's listening to who's your public is, I would say
everyone is listening to this podcast.
Keep doing what you love. Do what you're good at, like I did. I didn't compromise. And even though people are telling you that it might not be worth your time, if you believe in it, you can make it work. Be pragmatic about it, and you can make it work.
Amazing. Thank you very much, everyone, for being with us for another episode of the MARE Podcast, and we'll see each other next time. Maybe it's a date. Bye.